The final guide that I would like us to look at is going beyond the literature now into looking at doing your own research. So this is where you're not just looking at other people's research anymore, but you're starting to open up in your education context. Take this research that you have found and start to ask questions that you want to then explore and gather data for in your own education context. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview about how this is quite a big MESH guide, and there's quite a lot here. So I'm not suggesting that you would read all the sections. What you might want to do is just dip into it and find things that are relevant to you, at least to start with. One of the main things that this guide is designed to do is help you to just start on a research journey. And this little section here gives you some ideas about that and how to think about research. There's a little bit on terminology, just so you can get into the ideas about qualitative and quantitative data. A lot of the research that's done in education context looks at qualitative data, you know, the sort of data where you're not worried too much about big numbers, but you're looking at, you know, really rich data, the things that the participants can tell you about the context that you're in, the information about the context to really enrich what you're trying to find out about. So this deep and rich data. You can also do quantitative research as well. And a future development of this MESH guide will be to actually enable that to take place a little bit more. It just touches on it at the moment. It's looking mostly at present at qualitative research. Now, in this section, this is looking, and don't worry too much about the terms, but this idea of factors and variables. Now, variables are terms that are used often in quantitative research, where they're the things that in a context that you're working in, the things that make a difference to the thing that you're studying. They're all the different things that are happening, the different parts of the situation, maybe different, you know, things that influence maybe that question that you're interested in exploring. Within qualitative research, there's a lot of debate about this, but I've just decided to call them factors. So within qualitative research, these are the things that are happening in your context that you might want to find out about. So I'm going to give one example. So if we were thinking about children's resilience, because that's quite a big topic at the minute, and lots of people are interested in researching resilience and what affects that. So say we were looking at resilience in problem solving in mathematics, you might think about, so that's my focus, that's what I'm really interested in exploring. So what possible factors could be influencing children's resilience in problem solving in mathematics? Well, for example, it could be the ethos in the classroom, you know, how teachers respond to children when they actually struggle with mathematics or they get things wrong, you know, what's the response? There might be what's the approach to using concrete resources? Is that advocated? Is that suggested? Does that what happens when children struggle with a mathematical problem? So there's these sorts of things. There's also maybe the way that children have been taught to explore mathematical problems. So these are just all ideas. Can you see they're the sorts of things that may impact on the way that children may exhibit resilience? Now, I'll come back to that word resilience in a minute. Okay, so this is the idea then that we're going to try to think about some sort of question. I'm going to miss out the middle column for a minute, and I'm just going to jump to this column that's one from the end on the right. So this is a column that tells you a little bit about how to develop your own research design. And this is the one that I think is probably most relevant to everybody. Yeah? Other bits you can dip in and out of, but in order to develop your own research design, there are a series of stages that you go through. And the first stage is to identify your focus. So we've already talked about a focus of resilience, so we'll just keep with that for a minute. In order to explore resilience, we would need to actually ask some questions about it. So we need to think of some questions that we want to ask. And literature is a brilliant way to start doing that. Read the literature that exists, and that really helps you to think of questions. Also, look at your context that you're in. Look at what the children are doing. Ask, you know, just informally what the staff think about things, and that helps you to think of questions as well. Then you've got an overarching question, and then you've got some sub-questions. Now, going back to this theme of resilience, don't be worried about this term. I can hardly say it usually, so I'm going to have a little try now. Operationalisation. I quite liked it though, so I thought I'd just pick that one up. I picked it up from some literature, and I think it's quite a nice idea. All it means is when you've got an idea, a complicated construct, like for example, if you've got an easy thing to measure, like you want to measure how fast children are growing in height, it's fairly easy. You get a tape measure and periodically you would stop and measure them. That's not a problem. When you want to start to research something like resilience or creativity, which is a complex construct, now you start to think about it's really tricky. How do you know if a child is being resilient, or how do you know if a child's being creative? This is where it becomes a little bit trickier to actually explore these things in research. So what this section does is it tells you how to see or how to begin to see those things. So for example, I would be looking for indicators of resilience. So if a child was sitting down doing a problem, they may, if a child's resilient, I would expect them, when they overcome difficulties, that they wouldn't give up easily, that they would continue to try. They may even look for different ways of doing things. So can you see, these are suggestions of things you might start to look at in order to see the actual thing, that the construct that you're trying to investigate. Now, I saw a really interesting, it was my daughter's, one of her magazines that she has. It was really interesting, and it's related to this. I can cut this bit out later if it's a bit boring, but I'll tell you anyway because it's quite interesting. When astronomers now are looking at different planets and stars and things, they look with telescopes that look at different wavelengths of light. So basically, you know, looking at the infrared or the visible light or the ultraviolet. And when they actually look and take pictures through these different lenses that they use and these different telescopes that they use, they actually get hugely different ways of, you know, images and hugely different ways of seeing the planets or the stars. And this is the same way with us. When we're operationalizing a construct, when we operationalize it in different ways, we will see it in a different way. So it's really important that we sort of visualize it carefully and think about, you know, how are we going to see this thing that we're looking at? Okay, that's enough on that. So if we jump back then to this middle column, don't worry too much about these, but this is about the research methodology, and there are different types of research methodology. And one thing that you might think about doing is a case study, for example, where you're looking in depth at a particular thing within your school context. Very popular thing in education research is action research, where you go to the literature maybe and find out something that researchers have tried in another context and found has worked with children. You then bring it into your context, you try it out and you evaluate its effectiveness, and then maybe kind of modify it and then try it again, see if you can enhance it and make it work for you. So that's basically a very quick overview of action research. So there are other things there that you can look at. And then very last of all, on the last column, is this section about developing your research tools. Now, these are the actual things, just like a carpenter uses tools to actually do something with a piece of wood, you need tools to actually do something, to find the evidence in your context, to give you insights, to give you data, to actually help you to understand your context, or to understand the question that you're asking within that context a little bit more. So these are the different tools, the questionnaires, also surveys. This is a bit contentious about what you call them, but basically it's the same thing. It's a list of questions that you give to people to answer, and this section gives you some ideas about different types of questions that you may ask. Interviews, where you sit and discuss with people, and what you're trying to do in an interview is facilitate and enable the participants to tell you what they really think is important, and that's really skilled but a very interesting and powerful tool. So you would create interview schedule perhaps to help you to do that. Observations, where you would maybe have an observation checklist or something, you know, to sort of help you to focus your observations. It could be quite a detailed one, or it could be just a loose one to give you some ideas of things to look at, but there are suggestions in that section to help you. Document analysis, where you might look at certain documents within your school context, or maybe other documents that are government publications that you'd analyse these. this is a very interesting and new one, which I'm going to develop a bit more about the use of visual images in research, and that's a very powerful tool. For example, there's some research being done where children go around the school context that they're in and take pictures, take photographs, and then they've got something to talk to you about and share with you. And remember, we talked earlier within the ethics section about empowering. This is really a good way to empower children, because you're giving them a tool where they're in control of the images they collect, and then you've empowered them within the discussions that they're going to have with you. Deciding on the type of data you will collect, this is a little section on that, and basically that depends on the questions that you're asking, and the way that you word the questions can have a big impact on the data that you collect. And I think having someone to help you with that when you start off can be a good thing, you know, just to sort of how you frame those questions. But this mesh guide definitely gives you some insights into that and how the wording is important, and how changing the wording can change the way that you carry out your research. And then very last of all, how do you decide on the sample? And the sample basically is the participants that you would like to invite to become involved in your research with, and tell you about their insights and share with you their experiences. Okay, so I think that's my overview done.
Thank you.